Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley. Hi, everybody. It's Brian, working hard at the lab today, but I thought I would let you know that I do have a quick announcement. We have a giveaway. We're going to be giving away one Ricoh ScanSnap IX 2500 Receipt Edition. We're going to make the drawing right after April 30th. No purchase required. Suggested retail value $599. This is has one-touch simplicity, and our friends at Ricoh graciously provided it to us. With automatic invoice OCR, detachable receipt guide for small and curl documents, and lightning fast 45-page-a-minute duplex scanning. It transforms paperwork into clean, searchable digital data in seconds. If you want to register, it's cpate.ch/scansnap. The rules are at cpate.ch/rules, and the privacy policy is at cpate.ch/scanner-privacy. And for those of you attending the video version of this, I've actually put on the screen now a QR code that you can capture and use to register for the scanner giveaway. Again, we're giving one away. We're going to give it away again right after April 30th, and again, you must be an accounting professional to win. All the rules again are at cpate.ch/rules. So anyway, with that, thanks for joining us, and here we are back in the lab.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my co-host Brian Tankersley. And through the years, we've assisted the AICPA's CPA.com division on their startup accelerators. And I had the privilege of being at the convening days in New York City recently for the 2026 cohort. Now, the program's was started 9 years ago, so this was the 9th cohort or the 10th year. And, it was a delight to be in New York City. And Brian, sad that you couldn't be there this time, but we learn from all of these different vendors as we go. Now, it turns out that a number of notable players from CPA.com were in the room. Many of you know Eric Askerson from his town hall broadcasts every week, or Lisa Simpson, who's also on the AICPA town calls on a regular basis. Both participated in the events, but so did other key players like Kim Blasco, who's in charge of CAS, as well as Brandon Alfrey, who's in charge of tax. And then you also had Vindela Hale, who's the lead manager on the alliances. And we had the COO, Patrick Benar, and we had Michael Sarami, who's the EVP of Strategic Alliances, as well as Todd Cooper, who did the channels and so forth. In fact, Brian, I think you've got a picture of all of these different people that were there. So we did take a picture of everybody. And then Khalil Merhib was there, who's the EVP of Growth and Professional Services. Tom Hood participated. And last but not least, I don't believe I missed anything, is Michelle Thacker, who's on the lower right side of the picture, who is the Senior Director of Alliances. And really, between Vindela and Michelle, they were largely running the event. Now, also in the picture, you can see that there were a number of us who were third-party consultants that were invited in, including Brian Davis, who's the CEO of One Stop CPAs and a frequent listener to our podcast. He actually showed me a vibe-coded act, and Brian is kind of in the back next to me. And after the picture was taken, he showed me all the wonderful apps he's developed. So, hey, Brian, glad to have you listening again today. But also Ellen Choi, who is an AI consultant. Irfan Dosani is in the group here as well. He's kind of at the back there, but we've had Irfan in a prior episode here. Kimberly Ellison Taylor participated, as well as Caitlin Liu, who's the head of partnerships from Tabs, who was in the Accelerator last year. And then last but not least was Dan Luthi of Ignite Spot Accounting in Utah. Now, one omission, because she's the one that sent me the picture. So I kind of held it. In the green is Emily Remington, who's the director of the audit programs. So I wanted to make sure that you knew, and I've really tried to name almost everybody in the picture except for the various vendors and products. So I'm just going to run those pretty quickly because it's important that you know who they are. You've got Adaptive, who has a construction product. So you can see pictured Matt Calvano and Cole Meyer. Also, you've got Audit Pro and long-term friend and associate Peyton Baran and Paige, Paige is in the front there, who were with Confirmation. And Peyton had developed a legal system that was acquired by Confirmation before they were acquired by Thomson Reuters. Then you had the Kintsugi folks. And, I'm next to some of those guys over there, but they're the new tax product with Paige and Becknar and Jeff Gibson. And then you had Ping assistant Camden Bean and Chad Holmes, and I had the pleasure of having dinner with them at Gallagher's, a fine event. And I had Michael Cerami and Dan was there, and we had Vindella is there as well. And then Truss in the front there with both Dan Pinkhouse and Zach Mendel, who lives in Knoxville with you, and I know you talk to him pretty regularly. So I think, Brian, it is wise that, we met in the traditional room. So I took this picture of the Startup Accelerator group, and you can see there are 5 companies that were put into this program. So what I'd like to do in today's episode is summarize rather quickly what happened in the event and how things flowed without belying any confidences here. The Accelerator program has been an investment by the AICPA and CPA.com and new startups to try to innovate across the profession in several different areas. So first up is Adaptive. And in this particular case, Matt spoke for the group, and you and I have interviewed Matt before. I knew you would remember that. But Adaptive is an AI native accounting platform for construction. And he and Cole and I talked extensively about what they're doing. Adaptive is selling some direct, but they're building out their CPA firm channel for client accounting services. At this point, they're running 1,000 customers with 41 CPA partners. Almost all of these groups have raised capital, except for Truss. Truss is completely privately funded so far, but Adaptive has raised $26 million. They have built their product around being project-based, and they have a lot of budget and cost revenues, and they also connect to third-party products like Procore. Their most recent innovation was in voice agents. And the reason you might want to work with Adaptive is they clearly understand construction and construction client accounting services. They help you scale your practice, and they can give you differentiated advisory services with work in process and financial reporting in construction. Very interesting little company. We've known about them for a while, and they are being successful. So next up was Kintsugi. Now, I sat next to the Kintsugi guys, and it was fascinating to talk to Pujan, whose father actually helped originate Avalera sales tax. It was like old home week because he had to take a picture with me to send to Dad. And, I appreciated that. But, as Jeff and Pujan and I talked, it was pretty clear that these guys had great background because Pujan had actually worked at Meta and developed some of the fundamentals for open AI and intellectual property. So pretty interesting guy on that light. And Jeff had helped at Botley and Atlassian and Cloudflare, helping get those companies public. So it's not their first rodeo, if you will. But they decided to tackle sales tax as a data problem, but much different than all the other players who are trying to tackle it as a regulatory slash geolocated type of problem. So they started in 2023 most recently, they've been processing the order of 170 million transactions. They've got 630 customers on the platform with $29 million raised, and they've processed about 12.5 billion of sales tax. Now, I asked them what their maximum volume was, and right now they've hit about 3,000 transactions per second. They're growing well with 150 employees. They intend to be global. They're already handling sales tax in 100 plus companies, and they have a very large growth forecast, 5 million in revenue last year. They think they'll do 20 million here in 2026 and 70 million in 2027. But when we talked about establishing Nexus and doing sales tax audits and so forth, it was really quite stunning. They did identify that there were 681 sales tax changes in 2025. And you know, Brian, how we've talked about, states, counties, cities, special, stadium taxes and so forth in the past.
And that's before we even consider the geographic boundary changes in every jurisdiction that happened because of annexations and all kinds of things. So that is, that's one of those markets that is, the devil is definitely in the details.
Definitely in the details. And they pointed out things that people get wrong in sales tax because they stated that regulators don't forget. And I thought that was an interesting statement because they illustrated, and there were several that illustrated. Brian actually gave them the source on this, but a company that had been not collecting sales tax properly in Florida decided to cure and file a sales tax return, and all of a sudden they had $1 million in revenue. And the state of Florida says, "Is this number right?" Because you just don't go from 0 to 1 million. And so they were looking for their back tax there. But the regulators do not forget that there's a whole lot of this collection and remitting, but a whole lot of people over collect and then they pay it on to the state. But this is a case where if you don't pay the state or you don't return to the company, it's a prison sentence. You've talked about that before. So also collecting in the wrong jurisdiction is common, and that the penalties compound quickly, often 25 to 30% penalties. So they believe that they've built a platform that gives modern compliance across 5 pillars: exposure monitoring, accurate calculations, registrations and filings, which that automation is stunningly well done. They're doing deep integration and they've got human support. So the product's only been out a little over a year. They started selling in July of 2024. So they're new. There would be a little bit of risk that way, but I think with this company, it might be good risk. So that turns us then, Brian, to Ping Assistant. Now, we've also talked to Ping in the past. You may remember our discussion with Camden Bean, the CEO and co-founder. And again, I had dinner with Camden and Chad, and both of these guys have had LDS missions. I felt bad for Camden because his was on the Gold Coast in Australia and Brisbane, and he never got to go in the ocean the whole 2 years because of liability restrictions. Kind of fascinating. But Chad also was fancy fun because he went to Spain and we talked paella. You and I both know what that means to Dr. Bob, our associate for so long. But more important than the guys' backgrounds was what Ping does. Now, Camden, by the way, was the first unpaid intern at Divvy, which was acquired by Bill.com. So Divvy's spend and expense product, that's him. And he's a son of a CPA also. So what they have believed that they've built is a firm intelligence platform for modern advisory firms. And, Chad was involved with Docker. So he has a lot of technical background. Of course, you use Docker for a lot of things, Brian. But the whole idea here is that they have an individual executor for an advisor, and then they have a firm management. Now, this is not just a transcription tool because there's lots of those out there. Obviously, you and I use them all the time with Otter and others, but they've got a meeting assistant, email assistant, and client memory, and they hate the word CRM. They consider CRM a 4-letter word, but it builds a profile on clients with AI workflows. So they'll capture things like cash flow concerns or offhand comments or client complaints, And they build this tribal knowledge, which becomes institutional memory for your firms. The context stays with the firms when people leave. You get pretty much instant recall. Those things are all good. And it keeps the service consistent. They have integrated with Anchor to do change orders in their platform. And of course, we've talked about Anchor in other accounting technology lab, but it's pretty easy to start on this. It's really an advisory only platform with very minimal IT lift. Again, I'm trying to just give you a rapid overview of what these new Accelerator products look like. You'll see them at events and in other podcasts. Now, one that we've covered in the past is Truss. Now, Truss is one of the many portals in the market. They were the only business selected that did not raise outside money. They're basically self-funded. Today, they're supporting about 450 firms with 30 employees, and they're growing at 350% plus. Very good growth rate. Their deal is tax workflow from intake to work papers to prep to delivery. And they can do CAS and audit as well. And the key things that they're doing and actually demonstrated for us was some new agentic AI, how they have been partnering with many different players in a new strategic partner ecosystem, that they are really moving from beyond compliance to advisory workflows, and they demonstrated some of those to us, including their intelligence guided workflows and the very deep client insights that they have inside the platform. So they may be able to provide higher value relationships, which is part of the reason I like them so well. And I talk to Dan and Zach pretty frequently. And of course, Ken, their developer guy behind it, really is a smart guy. Well, last but not least was Pro AI. And Peyton spoke for this. Now, Peyton actually was an auditor at Goodman, which became Dixon Hughes Goodman, and so on in the roll up. But we knew Peyton from, again, the confirmation day, along with Paige. Now, when Peyton was an auditor, he primarily audited construction and government, and he named some other industries. But back in 2012, seems like forever, 14 years ago, he created legal.com, and then he moved to Nashville, acquired by confirmation.com about 10 years ago. So the Audit Pro product he started in 2024, and that particular product guides auditors through an entire financial statement audit. And the value proposition for them is quite straightforward. They're AI native. They have a very simple user interface, very intuitive. They believe that they can get immediate value realization, and they're very affordable at $199 per auditor. And some of the AI-based reporting that they demonstrated was just stunning. And, if you do audits prep comp review and you're looking for just a way to automate the workflow, Audit Pro is a pretty fascinating offering in that light. Now, I ran through all the products here just to try to give a sense of this. And, Brian, I think what I'll stop and do for a minute is just pontificate or reflect on the event itself. Again, I've had the privilege of working with many of the predecessor accelerator cohorts, and you have too. And fundamentally, the AICPA has a vetting process where they select from hundreds of applicants and narrow it down to a few. The numbers varied from 5 to about 8 at the top end. But then what they do is they bring the recipients in to New York. They provide background on accounting profession and marketing strategies and so forth. And then on the second day, and then usually the evening of, we do a dinner event where you get to have one-on-one time talking with many different people. The lunches and breaks and so forth, same thing on the first day. And then on the second day, they basically have an in-depth presentation from every product. That's why you heard me in this podcast kind of talk about the products, because I was just trying to recall for you what I observed. Now, in future podcasts, we'll dig deep on many of these tools. But the net here is that they present to us for an hour, we suggest strategies, and then they record B-rolls for promotion in the studio of the AICPA's lab. I was pleased to build relationships with all 10 of the people from the different companies. Many I've had in the past, you have too, and learn about what they were doing and why. But overall, that's kind of the lay of the land. And, again, good use of time, yes. Innovative platforms, yes. If you're interested in, learning more about any of those, you could reach out to the companies directly. So, Brian, what questions do you have or comments that you might have for our listeners?
Randy, it's an interesting cohort, and I've noticed that these tools seem to be quite a bit more narrow than some of the tools we've seen in the past. They're not trying to solve everything. They're trying to solve fairly narrow product problems. I'm quite impressed with every one of them. They all have interesting stories. I think it's going to be an interesting. We're in we're living in very, I hate to overuse the word interesting, but we are living in interesting times. We have more change going on in the space, more change going on in workflows than any time I've seen, probably except for maybe when we had the initial computerization of a lot of applications. But realistically, it is every bit as big as when 10 keys got thrown out the window. So it's interesting times. It'll be interesting to see how these find places in the marketplace. I think the AI audit applications, that's a pretty thick space right now with, the Mark's company out of the UK, and the AICPA's audit items, and again, so many data driven tools. You look at construction, I think that's going to have quite a few legs. I think Truss has got legs. The numbers they're putting up are pretty impressive. Um, Sales tax is always going to be difficult, and I'm excited about having viable competitors to Avalara to keep them honest on pricing. And again, firm level AI is an important thing. Now, is that going to get solved by Claude before Ping can get market share? I don't know, but I'm very glad to see folks coming at it, and I think it's reassuring that we have many very detailed solutions focused on our profession to solve these problems.
We did ask that question about competitive moat protection from the large language models as an example. So again, try not to violate any confidences behind the scenes there, but it's a pretty big deal to have these companies with of the five. Many of them already have significant revenue streams, and because of that, I'm more comfortable than normal calling out that you could almost adopt any of the five and be relatively safe in your adoption right now. So, that's a big deal. Well, Brian, I know I wanted to cover this while it was still top of mindset. And I appreciate you letting me rant for a while on this one because I think it is important to the profession. And as you know, friends, we'll be back with you on leading technologies for the accounting profession in another accounting technology lab. You have a good day.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.